and welcome. I'm so excited you've tuned into the Sacred Gut Punch podcast, the place of authentic stories, real breakthroughs, and endless possibilities. I'm Dr. Tomi White Bryan. I'm a coach and consultant in human and organizational performance and the creator of Emotional Intelligence 3.0, a system for achieving extraordinary performance. In this episode, we're doing something different, and I'm really excited about it. We're having a guest host. You met her in a previous episode. She's just a remarkable and beautiful human being, Shonna Tsacoumangos. And so I get to be the guest, and I'm going to turn the controls over to Shonna. Thank you for being here, Shonna, and take it away.
Great, Tomi. First and foremost, thank you for trusting me with this sacred space. I just want you to know I'm incredibly happy to be here with you today. And you and I don't waste any time, so let's just get right into it. So, Tomi, you've invited many guests to share their sacred gut punches, those profound disruptions that often rewire our lives. So I'd like to begin by asking you, what's the story of your own sacred gut punch? What brought you to this work in such a personal way?
Oh my gosh. All right. So the listeners already know I'm a big crybaby, and just you asking that question, I stirred it all up. Let's see if I can collect myself here. And the reason why the emotions start rolling is I think the most poignant moment and turning point, my sacred gut punch, happened in my 33rd year when my father passed away. And I remember everybody had left from the graveside service, and I slump over the casket and I say to no one in particular, Dad, I just don't know what I'm going to do without you. I don't know how I'm going to raise these two boys without your guidance. He was a psychologist, and I really thought, what a wonderful opportunity to make sure I get parenting right, and I'm putting right in quotes, with him as my guide. And then he was no longer here, and that ripped me out of my frame.
Wow. I want to honor that moment because I know the heartbreak of losing a parent, and it's not something that heals easily. As I think about that, I'm reminded of, one of the many themes that you often explore is how people sit in uncertainty, whether it's grief, illness, loss, or heartbreak. Those things don't resolve themselves neatly or quickly. So what are some practices or mindsets or even daily rituals that have helped you sit in that uncertainty with courage? And are there things you've leaned on when everything felt unsteady?
Such a lovely question. I went in search of those. It took me a long time to get my sea legs back. I went into just, grief got me and didn't let go of me. And it took a long time for me to come out on the other side of that. And part of that was my dad was my best friend. I now realize that wasn't helpful for my husband to have constant competition, right? In the way of my father. But my father and I got along. We liked to go to the bookstore on Sunday evenings for 3 hours and hang out together. And so I'm lost in this pit of despair. And there's a quote I love. Soren Kierkegaard says, "Life can only be lived forward, but must be understood backwards."
Wow.
And I now, standing here 26, 27 years, 28 years after his death, and I realize what a catalyst that moment was, because it created a force in me so strong, I couldn't deny it. So my father died of colon cancer, and my husband and I brought him to our house to care for him as he slowly slipped away to the cancer, because my mother was disabled and really couldn't care for him by herself. And so when my father passed away and we had the funeral, she just stayed, and it felt natural. And she and I are sitting at dinner one evening, and I say to her, I said, Mom, I can't take this anymore. There's a question burning inside of me, and if I don't get it out, I think it's going to destroy me. And that question keeps repeating. There's something you're supposed to be doing. What is it? There's something you're supposed to be doing. What is it? My mom at that moment looked at me with these really big, expressive eyes, like, what? And she goes, Tomi, your father used to say that all the time. I said, really? When? And she goes, right up until he died. Now, my father was a psychologist who served many people, helped many people, and so many of them showed up at his funeral and just talked about how much my dad had helped them. So for him to die without understanding his purpose or getting clear on the work that he was doing was what he was here to do, just catalyzed something in me, Shonna. I'm sitting at that dinner table and there's just, I don't know if it was a shattering inside. I don't even know what it was. All I know is that in that moment, I thought, I don't want to die and not live the tune or the song living within me. And I don't want that for my boys.
Wow. I think there are a couple things to unpack here. First, just the courage of being able to step into the role of caregiver for an ailing or a dying parent. You looked up to your father. You had this great relationship for your father, so with your father. So to see him in his place of vulnerability and then have the bravery and the strength, it takes a tremendous amount of strength to step into that role that your mother wasn't able to step into. His life partner wasn't able to step into that role. So you stepped into that role. And I really hope that at some point along your journey, you've really taken the time to appreciate for yourself what you did for your dad in that moment and for yourself too, and just what it took for you to be able to do that and honor that bravery and that courage that you were able to step into. Because I can tell you, not everyone would be able to do that. So I hope you've appreciated that.
Yeah, thank you for seeing that and reflecting it back. And I joke with my family and my coaching clients. I'm like, this is my last time living, people. I've done enough lifetimes. If you believe in reincarnation, I'm done. This is it. And one of the reasons why I say that is the beautiful gifts I've been given of completing cycles.
Mm.
I'm alive because my whole family rearranged itself shortly after I was born to keep me alive. I was born with a strange illness that almost took my life several times. We have a cap over our temperature control mechanism that keeps it regulated, and I didn't have that cap. So things in my environment would shoot my temperature up to 105, and my parents would rush me to the hospital. And they would say to my parents, listen, there's nothing we can do for her. Take her home, pack her in ice, and either she'll live or she won't. And I just can't imagine, as a parent getting those kinds of instructions. So I spent a lot of time packed in ice as a kid, as an infant. But I realized, as I aged, what a burden, what a responsibility on my family. Like my sister had to give up her stuffed animal collection. The questions always were, we'd like to go do this, but wait a second, can Tomi go? Is there anything in that environment that's going to trigger this? And so what I saw, the care of my father in his last mile was an opportunity for me to return the favor, right? He kept me alive, he and my family, and I was being given this beautiful opportunity to create balance by taking care of him. And I've been given the same opportunity with my mother and my brother. And people are like, why do you, because it's demanding to care for other people. But I feel like what a gift I've been given to create balance in the scales through this way.
That's incredible because, we can look back on experiences and we could take away gratitude, we could take away guilt, we could take away a lot of emotions. But the fact that you're channeling something that was well outside of your control, how you were born into this world, and the elements that you face were of nothing that you created. But now, instead of allowing those to become a lifelong crutch or to cripple you in your adult life, you've transformed that energy into how can I express gratitude for the people who made those sacrifices along the way. And that's just a beautiful level of maturity in and of itself. So when I see you, because I met you on the other side of that journey, and obviously we're all still in our journey in some form of way, but I see a strong, confident, resilient woman. So for your listeners who might be in the middle of their own sacred gut punch right now, what's one gentle starting place you'd encourage them to begin with toward their journey of wholeness?
It harkens back to that quote of, life must be lived forward, but can only be understood backward. And, and I came across that quote later in life. But what it's done is it's invited me to give myself grace as I stand in the middle of whatever fire I'm walking through. And know, I'm a big believer in there's no wasted space in the universe. There's no wasted energy. There's no wasted effort. Everything is happening for a reason. And whatever's in front of me is for me. And so if I can just recognize that there is something beautiful and profound waiting for me on the other side of this experience, and that takes grace and that takes kindness, not for others, but for yourself, right? Love yourself through the process. Oh, I didn't speak kindly today to someone because, I spent all night with my mother. Oh, you know what? I'll just circle back and apologize. It's okay. They love me enough to give me the space. And so it's really about finding this deep, deep vessel of grace and kindness within for yourself.
That's such an incredibly profound thought that you've expressed. And, in our work that we've done together, I always talk about, there's the what and the how. My brain goes, here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to do it. So I want to press on the how a little bit because, you often talk about how these gut punches aren't just wounds, but they're also portals that can be openings for healing and expanded consciousness. And I really love the imagery that evokes. So how, in keeping with my how do you hold gratitude or at least meaning in experiences that, once just felt unbearable?
That's such a great question. Part of it is people don't sometimes believe me when I say things, right? And I remember back to you and I, right? And the conversation we were having when something really devastating happened to you. And I softly said, this is not about you, right?
Yes.
And it took you a couple minutes to hear me, but you ultimately heard me. And what I remind myself is sometimes two things. One, I'm caught up in somebody else's program, right? And if I can remind myself who I am, and I liken it back to the moment that we found out, my husband and I found out we were the victims of a cyber fraud. $375,000 gone. We were selling our house, and the attorney doing the closing for the buyers wired it to a cyber fraudster.
Wow.
And in the first 5 minutes of finding that out, I heard, I'm going through all the horrors. It's the little shop of horrors. Oh, we're never going to own a house again. Oh my gosh, what if we never get the money back? Oh my gosh, catastrophizing. Oh my gosh, that. And then I heard my friend Lewis's voice break through all that, chaos in my head. And he said, Tomi, it's never, what are you going to do about it? It's who are you going to be about it?
Wow.
And in that moment, oh my gosh, I'm still Tomi. I'm still Aunt Tomi. I'm still mother to Shep and Warren. I'm still Jim's wife. I'm still, even though my kids say I'm not, I'm still funny. Right? I'm still me. And that was actually a critical moment in understanding What happens when we have these sacred gut punches? And it was very crystal clear with my father. It is an identity crisis. Who am I without this person? Who am I without this thing? And when we are not able, when we do not know our own true north, our own North Star, I call it the unique self. When we don't know the values, strengths, social currency, and purpose of the unique self, because that's what we always must root ourselves in. If we don't know those things, when the sacred gut punch comes, it takes us out, and we're not sure if we're going to survive it. But when you know who you are and the sacred gut punch comes, you know you're going to survive. You know, and you don't need to heal. I'm not always a fan of the word healing. The scar might heal, but you must find a new normal. It's not a healing, it's a harmonizing, it's an honoring. Oh gosh, this happened to me. How horrible. And one of the ways I track my own trajectory with that is the way I behaved at the death of my father, the way I behaved at the death of my mother, and the way that I walked with my beloved black lab, Mojo, as he took his last breaths.
Oh.
With my father, I wanted to fix it. I searched the country for doctors who would fix him, who could solve the stage 4 colon cancer, the mets in the liver. I didn't know how to be with the fact that he was dying. And when he was gone, my identity was shattered. With my mother and her death, I was able to be with her. And it was funny because I'm sitting on one side of her bed and my brother's sitting on the other side. And you can tell she's not talking. You know, if you've been with death, if you've walked that last 10 feet, you know, the person, all of the processes just slow down and they may not be talking. She died of congestive heart failure. And Mike's still trying to shovel medication in her mouth. He was me when my father died, right? Let me fix this. Some more medicine will help her. But I could just be with, oh, this is the completion of a life. This is the completion of a cycle. Then a couple years later, when Mojo died, he just, you know, sometimes those four-legged friends capture our hearts and don't let go. And that was Mojo for me. And I just held him. I just loved him. I didn't need to walk with him. I didn't need to sit with him. I just needed my love to meet his.
Wow. That's just incredibly profound and beautiful. And I know the pain of loss, and I've never heard it articulated so beautifully and compassionately as you just have. So thank you for that. You know, you and I have done some incredible work together, and it was through that work that I embarked on my own journey of transformation toward becoming the best version of myself. And the catalyst for that was the statement you mentioned. It's not about you. And I remember the quizzical look I gave you, like, what is she talking about? It's not about me. Of course it's about me. This thing happened to me. And it took me a few minutes to hear it. It took me a few months to understand it. And it took me even longer to embrace it as a philosophy where now I truly understand what you mean when you say it's not about you. And I truly internalize the fact that it isn't about me. And I'm able to now look at events that happen in the world with a different perspective. So to someone on that journey, like I said, it took me moments, then months, then a little bit more. If someone wanted to kind of fast forward to the epiphany that took me a little longer to get to, how would you distill down that the phrase "it's not about you" and how they can incorporate that? It became my mantra, and it still is, by the way. How can you distill that down in a way that someone could apply that practically to their lives immediately?
Yeah. So there are, for me, one of the things I've been trying to do is, if I distilled emotional evolution down into 4 questions, what would it be, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions is, and my coaching clients give me feedback on it. And one of those questions is, what is mine to do? Right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's about the helper, right? The role of the helper in the drama triangle is always trying to overhelp. And the way that I try to get my clients out of that is by saying, is this yours to do? And just because you can do it doesn't mean it's yours to do. Right.
Right.
And
Right.
the question that you're posing to me brings up in me one of those 4 questions, one of those emotional evolution questions of, how is this for me?
Mm.
This is not being done to me. This is being done for me. And in the wake of that cyber fraud scheme, I would lay awake late into the night saying to the universe or the God of your religion, whoever you talk to in those moments, I know this is for me. Show me what needs to be seen so I can learn the lesson and move on to the next part of my life. Because it felt really freezing. We'd already put money down on another house. We were going to move into another house, and all that got pushed back. And so I felt stuck. And that's the way a lot of people feel in this deep grief or this shearing off of a piece of their personality. And so it's not, oh, this was done to me, how horrible. It's, oh, show me how this is for me. And then I began watching the clues.
Mm.
And I do believe, I don't have any proof, I have no scientific evidence, we are one of the few people in the world who got our money back.
Wow.
And it wasn't 50,000 we got back. We got over $370,000 back because I believe I let go of the outcome.
Mm.
And the way that I did that was asking, how is this for me? Show me what needs to be seen. I know this is a mirror showing me something about myself. What is that? I don't know if that answers the question.
It does beautifully and powerfully. And thank you for sharing that. It's one, I'm so happy you got your money back. I also believe that it's something about releasing this perceived control. And I say perceived because often what we think we're controlling, we're not. But it's something just spiritually beautiful about releasing this perceived control that allows the universe to do what it does, because you would have been you, whatever the outcome had been. And that's the beautiful reality. And then to get your money back on top of that, it's just almost your universe saying, you know what? Thank you for trusting me. Here's your reward.
And part of the emotional evolution in Emotional Intelligence 3.0 is what you're talking about. It's this building of trust, right? That identity model of value, strength, social currency, and purpose is really about building trust with the self.
Yes.
Right? Who are you going to be about it? Well, I trust myself to know that this is for me, and I'll be patient and wait for the lesson because life is going to show it to me.
Yes.
Right? Sometimes it might take 10 years. Like, for instance, with my father, it took me 21 years to understand why. He died young. He died at 64, just shy of his 65th birthday. And I raged at the universe for 6 months, right? How dare you, right? And the irony in that, Shonna, is we're all going to die. And while I knew that, I had refused to accept it.
Yes.
Right? And that's the juxtaposition that the mind can stand in. That I know it's coming, but I'm not going to accept it. Right? And that's the denial, right? The grief. Oh, how,
Sure.
But what happened 21 years later, I'm working on a book called the Tommy Lama Purpose Guide, because I write some books under the pen name Tommy Lama. And I was just sitting there reflecting on the fact that my father didn't know his purpose, and I set off on what I call a 20-year march through the desert, a forced
Mm-hmm.
march to find out, who am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? And as I'm sitting there reflecting on all of this, I have a thought of, oh my goodness, what if my father's purpose was not to know his, so that it would be such a catalyst and a force in my life that it would drive me. And now I know it would drive me to create this model of this body of work on human potential through emotional evolution. And oh my gosh, if he hadn't been willing to not know his, I would not know mine in this way. And what a gift, what a role he agreed to play for me.
Wow. So now you're going to have me with the tears. And, because a couple of things you said there. One, everyone's going to die eventually. I think in our mind, there's this point where we kind of set this artificial date. Well, after this day, like if someone dies and they're 99, you go, oh, well, they lived a good life. Wow, 99. Well, 63 is like, whoa, it's not time yet. That's not an acceptable age. So we have that struggle going on. But it reminds me, so my mother passed away at 53.
Oh.
And you talk about the gift that they left. I've told you before in my story, my mother was my faith North Star. If I had a question about my faith, I'd go to my mother. Well, right before she died, I had some questions. In fact, the last conversation I had with her, I had some questions about my faith that she refused to answer, which was very uncharacteristic for her. I'd call, she'd answer, and off I'd go with whatever the answer was. But in this particular case, she absolutely refused to answer. I did not know that was the last conversation I would have with her. In fact, she promised, we'll talk later. Well, we didn't. And after she died, I was very angry with her for not fighting harder, with the universe for taking her away. But fast forward 15 years, similar to you, I now realized the greatest gift she gave me was not answering those questions, because it allowed me to figure out for myself what my true faith North Star is and how I wanted to walk my journey of faith. And I had to grow up and figure that out on my own. But had she given me the answer in that moment, I would have accepted what she said without question and continued on my journey. So I really understand the gift of being able to look back in hindsight and embrace those gifts that were painful the moment they were given, but end up being transformative later. So I want to pivot slightly. You mentioned trust, and trust that's been my kryptonite for most of my life. That's something I've struggled with. So you've shared before that in your childhood there were some betrayals, and that at points your parents, like mine, just didn't have the skill sets to give you what you needed, right? So that kind of start in life makes trust feels almost impossible. Yet here you are doing work that requires an enormous posture of trust. So can you talk about what that shift looked like for you, moving from a place of self-protection to a place of vulnerability? And what helped you lean into trust when it probably felt like the riskiest thing to do?
Whew, yeah. Wow. I think that I've been working on a new trust model. So it's crazy that you asked this question. And at the center of it is self-trust, right? We actually have trust backwards. And you'll hear most people say, you have to earn my trust. No, you should give me your trust until I prove I'm not trustworthy. And our hearts are so vulnerable and so protected from that vulnerability. But when you pair what we've been talking about together, when we pair together that everything is for me, and if you betray me, it was supposed to happen. And I share this story of with a lot of my clients. I say, listen, here's my origin story, right? There's a God in a big supply airplane. Instead of pushing supplies out the back, he pushes little angels who on their way down become human beings. And he's in the back of that plane and he raises his hand and he goes, Who loves Tomi enough to betray her as her mother? And a little angel, who on earth will be known as Janie Branch White, my mother, raises her hand and says, I love that little angel who's about to be Tomi enough to go to planet Earth and betray her. Because that's how she's going to learn to trust and love in ways she never thought possible. And so God says, great. Now, who's willing to betray Tomi as a father? The little angel that will be known as Tom White raises his hand and says, I love her enough to do this. And then God comes up to me with a little backpack and he puts it on me and he pushes me to the back of the plane. And as he has his hands on my back and he gives me that little loving shove that makes me jump out of the plane, he goes, remember, you're gonna forget it all.
Wow. Wow. If you could find an artist that you could commission to draw that plane with the angel, I think it would be an incredible visual, and as you work on this trust model, I am waiting with bated breath because, I think one of the challenges, for myself and people in general is sometimes when we think about evolving, transforming, trusting in the way that you describe, we fear that it means losing ourselves. And, so in your experience, how do we hold on to the core essence of who we are while still evolving to who we're meant to become?
I love that. That's why I think the identity model that's inside of the Emotional Intelligence 3.0 body of work is so critical. Because when I know who I am, it doesn't matter what's happening around me. I just root myself in that, right? And I trust that version of myself. I trust that true nature. I trust that unique self to be able to stand in the middle of whatever's happening and go, oh, I could become entangled in that by reacting, but I'm going to just wait a second and see what my values invite me to do in this moment. Oh, what would my purpose call to me to do in this moment? And sometimes doing nothing is the perfect right answer. I don't have to do anything except be with.
Yeah. Doing nothing oftentimes is the perfect right answer and also the most difficult thing to do is doing nothing. So, Tomi, you've created this space where people can tell their most vulnerable truths. And in doing so, you've given countless listeners permission to embrace their own stories with honesty and courage. So I'd love to ask, what's the hope that you carry for this podcast and for the people who listen to these conversations week after week?
Oh, another lovely question. Another deep, profound, lovely question. Why am I not surprised that that is what you present me with? And I thank you for that, because what's become crystal clear to me is there are 3 parts to emotional evolution. First is emotional resilience. Developing that leads to high emotional intelligence. Then there's emotional balance, which leads to emotional well-being and emotional wholeness. And then there's system balance, which then leads to unity with all of the existence, right? Oneness. And in that, I saw, the sacred gut punch. Being able to manage that is about developing the skills of emotional resilience. And I'm really proud of the guests who've come on and so gratefully shared their vulnerabilities and their betrayals and their rising from the ashes, because we need role models of what emotional resilience looks like. And that's what's happening in this podcast.
Well, that's beautiful. And I can tell you as a listener and as a guest, that's what I receive. It gives me the confidence and courage to know I'm not the only one going through something. I'm not the only one still evolving. I'm not behind the curve and everyone else has figured it out, that we're on a collective journey and there's someone else out there experiencing what I'm experiencing, and to be vulnerable, for them to be vulnerable enough to admit it, not only helps them in their journey, but it helps countless other people. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for allowing us into your beautiful stories today and for the sacred work you're doing through this podcast. these conversations really remind us that even in the moments that break us open, there's wisdom, there's healing, and there's possibility waiting to emerge. And it's just my hope for everyone listening to this podcast that it leaves them with the sense that their own gut punch could one day be the beginning of something sacred for them, and that they can honor their sacred gut punch as a step toward becoming their fullest and truest version of themselves. I'm honored to be your guest host today.
Well, I think I just lost my job.
Not even close.
You have been magnificent. The questions profound and stunning. And I'm so grateful that you have shared this space with me today. I love you dearly.
I love you back. Thank you, Tomi.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Sacred Gut Punch. I'd like to thank our sponsors who make this podcast possible, the EI 3.0 companies of Bryan Insights and the Center for Emotional Well-Being, and of course, always to my husband, attorney Jim Bryan. Thank you for your endless support and love. I love you to the moon and back, Jimmy. If you're finding inspiration in the stories, please like and subscribe to the podcast and share with your friends and family who can benefit from these stories of resilience and rising. And if you're experiencing a sacred gut punch, remember, while you may feel alone, you are not. Help is out there. If you or someone you know is in crisis and considering suicide or self-harm, please seek support. Call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988, or chat at 988lifeline.org. And if you're not in the United States, Befrienders worldwide at befrienders.org can help you. Until next time, dear ones, may you use the difficulty as you rise with grace.